Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia and this is the SITREP for the day of 1083 to 1084 for the 10th to the 11th of February. We're going to start off with the southern flank. So we're going to do anti-clockwise this time around. We have fighting reported over at Pridniprovsk according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Usually when they say this, I will put it as shelling. However, because of the latest frontline changes from the previous SITREP that we have reported, this distance is actually close enough to really put it as a fighting. Is merely 1.6 kilometers away. So yeah, if it's mentioned Pridniprovsk, I gotta just put it as fighting. So otherwise, shelling is reported at Andriivka and Berislav. So that's all from the Kherson front. Information, of course, from the Russian Defense Ministry. Over the Zaporizhia front, at the Kayamsky sector, there is shelling reported at Stepnokhirsk, and fighting is reported at Kayamsky, according to the Russian Defense Ministry on both days. So on both 10th and the 11th, which means the Russians are probably doing some operations to clear out the Ukrainians in the southern flank of Kayamsky. So that is a possibility. Over at the Kharkiv sector, just next door, this Kharkiv and this the sector around here, there is fighting being reported over at Andriivka, according to the Russians. Andriivka also by the Russians. Charivny, which is in the latest Ukrainian Defense Ministry's report, mentioned Russian attack. So the Ukrainians are talking about Charivny, which is actually a very unusual place because usually we have nothing happening around here. The last report was in last year's October. So this is a bit interesting. Otherwise, the fighting at Andriivka and Danilivka is pretty usual. This is a common situation around at the Kharkiv sector. So let's wait and see whether this Charivny thing will become something serious. We move on away. Huepole sector, we have mentioned of Huepole by the Russian Defense Ministry on both days as well. The actual attack vector is unknown. It could possibly be coming from Mafopil direction because the last time that we have any action was from Mafopil. But tentatively unlikely to be the case. There's probably some skirmishes and FPV drone strikes or whatnot somewhere around here. We move on to the Donetsk front at the Velika Novosilka sector. We have the Russian forces expanding their zone of control in the north of Vremivka and Velika Novosilka. This is mapped by Deep State UA. Otherwise, based on the Russian Defense Ministry, the Russians is pushing out towards Skutny, Belatsky, Shevchenko is shelling probably because it's too far away. Novosilka, which is also acknowledged by the Ukrainian side on the 10th, and Novopil. So all of this information is coming from the Russian Defense Ministry, with Russian forces basically pushing up in various directions all across the front line. So let's continue to monitor whether this is some major offensive. The fact that we have this update about the frontline change in the north of Vremivka is pretty interesting, but although it's also very expected that the Russians is going to secure the northern part. Geolocation at Novopil of Russian airstrike with the fat bombs on Ukrainian positions was noted. So if you zoom in, you can see that the Russian forces has taken some forest lines around this area. Previously, the Ukrainians have a position around here. So now the Russians is probably already taken more or less the position or fire control in that position, which means the Ukrainian forces probably have already retreated to the next line of defense around this sector. So to hold back the Russian advance in a more advantageous position because near the river is downhill, so it's a bit dangerous to be there. So let's wait and see how these continue to move on. Over at the Andriivka front, we have fighting reported at Bahate, according to the Russian Defense Ministry on the 11th. Oleksievka was mentioned by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry on the 11th as well. Constantinople is by the Ukrainians. Zelenivka is by the Ukrainians. Dashny is by the Ukrainians. Andriivka is by the Ukrainians and the Russians. So Ukrainians on the 10th, Russians on the 11th. So all in all, we have how should I zoom? Fighting moving in Bahate. There's Oleksievka attack. Battle of Andriivka. Dashny was being pushed. Zelenivka is mentioned, and Constantinople. So of significance, of course, is the frontline changes over in Andriivka, particularly in the city itself. The Russian forces are conducting a flanking operation in the north. They are taking all the heavy entrenchment that's protecting the northern part, and in the central part and the eastern part, the Russian forces have expanded their zone of control according to the Ukrainian mapping. So largely, this don't make a lot of sense to me because yeah, I feel like the Russians have already taken everything here. They're just now conducting a northern flanking operation. But yeah, so this is just a continuation of the battle. In the center of Andriivka, geolocation confirmed Russian presence at the post office building. So we move further up north to the southern flank of the Pokrov front. We have mention of Slovianka by Ryba. There is geolocation confirming Russian presence in this region, this gully here, west of Slovianka. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the capture of Yasinove in their yesterday's summary. Otherwise, fighting is reported at Yasinove by the Russian Defense Ministry on the 10th. Stripne was by Deep State UA, similar for Zaporizhia because of the front line change. So Russian forces are attacking in these various sector. So zoom in on this part at Zaporizhia and Stripne. Russia is now on the verge of full capture of Stripne as they continue to push up north while another force was pushing westward into the center of Zaporizhia. So that is a continuation of the ongoing battle. So we will continue to monitor. I think Stripne will be more or less captured within the next few days. Because the intel will come slow, so it might take actually a few days. Andriivka was mentioned by the Russian and the Ukrainian defense ministries as the Russians continue to try to conquer the rest of Andriivka. So nothing's particularly stand out in terms of this. Over in the Pokrov sector, we have mention of Uspenivka by both sides. Novoserhievka was mentioned on the 11th by the Russians. Ukrainians also very interestingly for the first time mentioned Molodetske. Molodetske is this border town between the Dnipro and Donetsk, and which means the Russians are now making pushes towards Molodetske. So Uspenivka, Novoserhievka, Udashny was mentioned, Kotliny is mentioned, Zifrove is mentioned. Ukrainian and the Russians clashed at Pischane. So the Udashny mentioned by both sides. So Russian and Ukrainians also mentioned Kotliny. Vifrove, I think, is by the Russians. No, it's by the Ukrainians. So Pischane is by the Russian side. So there's a lot of actions around this sector. So let me try my arrows. Yeah. So some slight small frontline change at Udashny is not important. Ukrainians has taken some extra grounds within Pischane due to geolocation confirmation. So that's all. That's all. Nothing. Yeah, it's just the interesting part is that the Russians is now returning to storming towards the border of Dnipro and Donetsk. We move on over to the Minokhrad sector. We have fighting reported at the Chanske, Lysivka, Minokhrad, Promin, and Horodivka. So Ukrainians have taken, or at least they claim to have taken, the eastern part of Dashchenke. So information, the Ukrainians did also mention that the Russians attacked on the 10th. So not sure. It sounds a bit contradicting in that sense. Ukrainians mentioned about Lysivka, and then the Russians mentioned about Minokhrad or Dimitrov. Prominence mentioned by the Ukrainians, Horodivka by the Russians. So over in the northern flank, we have continued actions in this sector with Russian forces attacking towards Tarasievka, Baranivka, Vodyany Druhi towards Malinivka, Yelizavetivka, and Myrolubivka. As you can see, the arrows, the Russians are pushing in all different directions, and particularly some major developments happening over at Malinivka and Vodyany Druhi, with the Russian forces taking positions into the highway exchange, as well as securing the closest farming warehouse or barn kind of thing nearby. And then the Russian forces also secured more grounds according to Ukrainian mapping in the south of Vodyany Druhi. So these are all very important changes, which means the Russians now effectively controls the highway between Constantinople and Minograd. Over at the Thorax front, we have fighting reported over at Dilievka, Thorax, Skremenivka, Novopaske, which is also Petrivka, and shelling was mentioned at Katerinivka. Nothing particularly new in terms of this sector. The Ukrainians continue to mention fighting at Thorax, whereas the Russians on their Telegram channel, in their Russian Defense Ministry channel, has been celebrating and interviewing the soldiers for the heroic victory at Zerzhin, which is Thorax. So yeah, they're already celebrating. So the Ukrainians are still talking about fighting. So yeah, that's the parallel universe there. Moving into the Bakhmut front in the southern flank, Bilohora was mentioned by the Ukrainians, and the Russians mentioned about fighting at Peteshne. So the fighting in this sector, yeah, is probably skirmishes. Over at the northern flank, we have fighting reported at Chasivya, Minkivka, and Vasilkivka. So interesting one, of course, is the one at Vasilkivka, because this reported by the Ukrainians, it might change strategic situation if the Russian actually push there. Geolocation of a Spartan armored personnel carrier getting hit by FPV drone, so not important. Minkivka was mentioned by the Russians, but yeah. So let's move on from here. Over the Siversk front, fighting is reported at Zvenivka, Siversk, Verkhovokanyamsky, Bilohorivka. Some frontline change around there due to some geolocation. Horivka and Serbianka was mentioned to be attacked. How this attack is unclear. At Bilohorivka, the geolocation that shows that part of Bilohorivka has been taken. This leads to some very general frontline change on our mapping. But this is just a very, I'm not even sure, foresty, grassy, I don't know. It's just a terrible place to fight in. So that's what Bilohorivka is. Over at the Liman front, Yampil was mentioned to be shelled, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. And the rest of Liman, we have fighting reported at Novi, Novolyubivka, Koloziazy, Terny, as well as Yampolivka. So this generally, is pretty much more or less the same thing, except that we have a return of Novi being mentioned. So this is mentioned by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry on the 11th. Otherwise, the main action is, I think, at Yampolivka. Russia and Ukrainians both talking about fighting over there. Koloziazy was mentioned by the Ukrainians on the 10th. So it seems like the focus is just over this area. This is where the main push are, not on this side of the river. Move on further up north, over at the Borova front. So at the Borova front, okay, anyway, before that, there is fighting reported at Juzde-Lyubivka, according to the Russian Defense Ministry on the 10th. So over at the Borova front, we have the usual, is of course a combination between the two defense ministries, with fighting reported at Novoyehorivka, Novosahievka, Kopanki, Zelenehai, Novopeternivka, Novokryakivka, Zarzove, and Bohoslavka. So yeah, generally as usual, strategically, it looks like a whole wall of arrows, but no frontline changes. So it's pretty skirmishy as far as I'm concerned. Moving into the Kupiansk front. At the Kupiansk front, we have fighting reported at Petropavlivka, according to Russian and Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and Stepova, Novoslavka only being reported on one day on the 10th, but that's about it. The main attack is still coming in the Petropavlivka region. Over at the Voreshna front, we have only one report by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry about fighting at Kindrashivka. So clearly the Russians are pushing from Kalinove region towards Kindrashivka, where the Ukrainians are holding the lines. So this seems to be the main push by the Russian forces, but that's about it. There's nothing else over in the rest of the Voreshna front. Over in the Kharkiv front, in the far east, there is fighting or attacks reported at Vykovaka or Okovaka. So and then another shelling report is reported at Veliki Buluk. This is a junction, which is why it tends to attract shellings or missile strikes by the Russians, and it seems like the Russians are attacking Vukovarka as a distraction, I guess. So that's about it from this sector. Further to the usual places at Voschansk. Of course, Voschansk is continuing to be fought over, being reported by the Ukrainians. They mentioned about this. Russians instead talk about Stanikovo. So it's this area here. Is it an attack? Is it just shelling? It's unclear. They also mentioned about Zosnevoye, but I'm not sure where exactly this place is, so it's not mapped on the mapping. So that's all from the Kharkiv front. At the Kursk front, we have in the southern flank, so let me zoom in, fighting is reported at Guevo and at Malevoye. Krylovka was not mentioned. Geolocation of Russian airstrike on Ukrainian position was noted. So yeah, so depressing if you get airstrike. Over at the Sudja region, we have shelling reported at Oleshnya, Gogolevka, Roboskina, Zelenshenka, Goncharovka, Sudja, Kozachal Loknya. I would say the attacks is only at Komarkov as well as Manovka. So mainly that's about it in the center region. This one is Molovoy, by the way, in case you do not know. So again, I have to say this attacks is not noted as artillery or airstrikes by the Russian Defense Ministry. They say that these are several group of forces inflicting fire damage on Ukrainians. So most likely it's just drone attacks, I would say, and probably some artillery. In the northern flank, we have fighting reported at Novaya Sorokina, Nikolaevka, Malaya Loknya, Nikorsky, Kositsa. Ukrainians, however, claim that they have some success over Kulenkoye. So that's about it. Strategically, nothing changed except for the Ukrainian claim. And then over on the western flank, we have some major updates. Russian forces attack at Lebedevka and Svediklovo and Nikolaevo Darino, and particularly at Nikolaevo Darino, the Russian forces basically have captured most of the town. And then over at Svediklovo, Russian forces have managed to expand their control in the northern part of Svediklovo as well as the far north. So definitely it's making some success, despite the Ukrainians are the one doing the offensive. The Russians are capturing the grounds. So that's about it. So I'm falling asleep. Do press the like button, subscribe, do check out all the other reports. Subscribe at DPA News, and I'm still figuring out how to manage my content strategy in a way that I feel satisfied. But whatever it is, support my work. I hope you can. And I'll see you guys in the next update.